or derogatory with respect to Mr. Prude?
Yes, there was going to be a point in time where that was to be addressed in the internal investigation.
But that's something you noticed when you saw the video, right?
That is correct.
And that's something you didn't tell the mayor about when you spoke to her on the 23rd. Is that fair?
Correct. The focus was on the force that was used on Mr. Prude, as well as Mr. Prude's condition, and his prognosis was not good.
Okay. You testified earlier, Chief, that one of the things you mentioned was that there would be a criminal review of the police officer's conduct, right?
That is correct.
What, as best you can recall, did you tell the mayor about that?
I told the mayor that based on the prognosis of Mr. Prude, that we were going to treat this as an in-custody death because his prognosis was not good. There was an indication that Mr. Prude may pass away. We started to have conversations about as to ordering an internal investigation that was conducted by the professional standards section, which was an investigation to determine violations of policy or procedure within the department. Then we also had a criminal review that was going to be conducted by the major crimes unit, as they had responded that night because they were already in on another homicide that occurred that morning. So the criminal review was ordered to gather facts as to whether there was any criminal conduct on the part of the police officers. I also told the mayor that I was going to reach out to Sandra Dorley, the district attorney, as a result. And I texted Sandra Dorley that day, and I had a phone conversation with Sandra Dorley the next day.
Okay.
About such.
That's helpful. A couple questions to clarify. You used the term, I noticed, criminal review. Is that the same thing as a criminal investigation?
Criminal review, some may think so, but the criminal review is going to be a fact-finding by major crimes, and ultimately with it being turned over to the district attorney, the actual investigation.
Okay, fair enough. And did you tell the mayor on the 23rd that you mentioned the Monroe County DA, correct?
Correct.
Did you say anything about the Attorney General's office potentially becoming involved in this matter?
I don't believe so at that particular point in time. I mentioned the district attorney was going to review the case. Then I had reached out to the district attorney to ask her to review the case and let her know that I was going to be ordering a criminal review of the incident.
Were you aware when you spoke to the mayor on the 23rd that the governor had issued something known as Executive Order 147 that would give authority to the Attorney General's office to investigate significant injuries to unarmed people that are inflicted by law enforcement?
Yes. At that particular point in time, Mr. Prude was still alive. So I didn't mention the fact that the Attorney General's office would be involved early on in that conversation that I had with the mayor.
But you knew that, it just you didn't mention it because you were focused on the DA, is that fair?
Correct. The incident was just that day. The incident was hours old.
Okay. And did you specifically tell the mayor that there would be an internal investigation by the professional standards section?
I did.
And did she ask any questions about either the criminal review or the internal investigation that you were referring to?
No, not that I remember. I just remember explaining to her, the process of such, and given the fact that his prognosis was not good, that I was ordering those two investigations that day. I told her that Lieutenant Sweatman from the professional standards section would be doing a preliminary review. And the preliminary review is within 2 days of a use of force incident or any incident that I obligate to PSS, professional standards section, that they would do a review, which means watching all the body-worn camera video within 48 hours of the incident and providing me an interdepartmental correspondence based on their preliminary findings. That report from PSS, professional standards section, is not a report in its finality. It is just a preliminary review of the incident.
Catherine, thank you, Chief. Catherine, can you pull up for us Exhibit 3? Just go to the first printed page. So Chief Singletary, is this the preliminary review report that you were just referring to from Lieutenant Sweatman of the Professional Standards section?
Yes.
I noticed that it's dated the 23rd of March. Is that the date you received it?
Yes, I believe it was that evening.
And I want to focus you on a couple of aspects of this. By the way, just for the record, we're marking this as Exhibit 3. It's pre-marked, and it's a document bearing the Bates number Singletary 68 through 70. Catherine, if you could go to the second page of that document. Actually, bottom of the first, Chief, reading over to the second. Sorry about that. So the sentence begins at the bottom of page 1 of 3. The police reports, now if you turn the page, support that force in the form of stabilization and segmenting was utilized only after Mr. Prude attempted to get up from his seated position on the street. Do you see that?
I do.
Here again, we have, in this case, Lieutenant Sweatman drawing a distinction between stabilization and segmenting. Do you see that?
I do.
And that's because those are two different things. Fair enough?
He does use the word and segmenting. And my description to the mayor, like I said, the mayor and I talked in plain language. She would not know what the term segmenting mean. So I described to her as to what I saw in the video.
I appreciate that. I'm just asking a narrow question, which is, do you agree that stabilization is different from segmenting?
Yes.
Okay.
It's still a stabilization technique. The head is being held on the ground.
A little further down the page, Lieutenant Sweatman in a bullet point says, at that time, officers Vaughn, Tality, and Santiago utilized level 2 techniques, parentheses, non-impact force, to keep Mr. Prude from standing. Do you see that?
I do.
What are level 2 techniques?
It would be a pressure point, non-strike techniques, punches, kicks that didn't occur. So that would not be a level 2. That would be a level 3. So level 2 would be, it could be pepper spray, it could be stabilization.
Mm-hmm. And a hypoglossal pressure point would be level 2? I'm sorry?
Correct.
Okay. And here again, we have Lieutenant Sweatman referring to the segmenting technique as something that Officer Vaughn utilized, correct?
That is correct.
And he also says that a hypoglossal pressure point was also documented on the use of force report from Officer Vaughn, correct?
Correct.
And when he describes Officer Talladay's conduct, he says that Talladay appears to utilize ground stabilization in the beginning, but eventually transitions to a knee on top and maintains arm control. What did you understand Lieutenant Sweatman to be referring to when he talked about ground stabilization?
It would have been maybe a knee across the shoulder blade of Mr. Prude.
Okay. Did you have this report from Lieutenant Sweatman when you spoke to the mayor on March 23rd?
No.
I'm sorry?
No, I did not.
Okay.
This report was given to me in the afternoon.
Did it come to you by email or just by hand delivery or some other means?
I believe it was via email.
Okay. In your call with the mayor, or your calls with the mayor on the 23rd, was there any discussion had about whether or not this incident should be reported to members of the city council?
No.
That's something that occurred to you as something that might be considered at that point?
No.
Why not?
Mr. Prude was still alive at that point. It just wouldn't be a consideration to contact city council at this point with regard to a use of force. We primarily, certain uses of forces don't contact city council.
Well, you're certainly aware of situations where there's been uses of force by RPD that did not result in someone's death, where the council wanted to know about that. Would you agree with that?
Correct.
And Christopher Pate case that you referred to in your conversation with the mayor that day was exactly such a case, right?
The Christopher Pate case, yes. That's an incident that, myself and Deputy Chief Simmons, at the time we were in acting capacity, that we were the ones that phoned the mayor in August. I remember in August of 2019. Me and Deputy Chief Simmons were the ones who advised the mayor about Mr. Pate.
Got it. Catherine, you could take this down. We don't need an exhibit on this. I'm just going to ask a few questions. I guess my question is, when you spoke to the mayor on the 23rd and the issue of the Christopher Pate case arose, did she say anything about the fact that the Christopher Pate case had been one that had been reported to the city council and that they had wanted to see the body-worn camera video in that context?
We never talked about the city council.
Okay. And when you spoke to the mayor on the 23rd, was there any discussion about notifying the public of the fact that there was a criminal investigation of members of the RPD that you were at that point ordering to occur?
There was no discussion.
Okay. Is that something that occurred to you and you decided not to bring it up, or just never occurred to you?
There are criminal reviews, internal investigations done every day, in some form, that are ordered. Not every day, but there are criminal reviews that are done that don't involve city council.
Well, I want to make sure my question is clear. I'm not asking now about notification to the council. I'm asking about notification to the public. Is it your testimony that there are officers of the RPD who are subject to criminal investigation, and that is not something that is told to the public when it's happening?
I would say criminal reviews. Yes, there have been times where there has been a criminal review in the department, whether it's conducted by, special investigation sections or major crimes, that it's not made public.
Mm-hmm. When there is an officer-involved shooting, does that trigger a review by the major crimes unit, a review of the conduct of the officers?
That is correct.
Okay. And that's a criminal review, just like the criminal review that you ordered here, right?
That is correct.
And when there's been an officer-involved shooting in your experience on the RPD, the fact that there is a criminal review undertaken of the officers is something that is discussed in public. Is that fair?
That is correct. I think, I think you're talking about an incident where a shooting, officer-involved shooting, would occur in the street. The media is going to be made aware of that. An officer has fired, charged his weapon. People in the street will be made aware of that as well.
Exactly. So when there's an officer-involved shooting and the media is made aware of it, kind of everybody knows that this has occurred. And in that context, it's the custom of the department to say, yes, and we're investigating the officers. Is that fair?
Yes, because typically there is awareness about it, broad awareness in the community. When an officer discharges his weapon in the community, there's broad awareness. The media listens to scanners and the like. So, yes.
But in this case, since there wasn't any media coverage of the mental health arrest of Mr. Prude and the restraints that were used against him, there was no public announcement of a criminal investigation of police officers. Is that right?
That is correct.
And the only difference between an officer-involved shooting situation where it would be announced and this situation where it wasn't announced is the fact that the media had picked up on what had occurred with respect to Mr. Prude.
I wouldn't categorize it that way, no.
Why not?
Because you're saying that the only reason why it wasn't announced because the media had not picked up on it. No, I wouldn't categorize it that way.
Okay. Well, tell us why you think it wasn't announced other than that reason. Announced publicly, I mean.
There was just no, at that particular point in time, Mr. Prude was still alive during that entire week. Things had taken their course. The investigations were underway, and there was never no conversation about it. April 10th, when I forwarded information to the communications director, Justin Roy, to let him know what the incident was and what the incident was about. You know, he had indicated that there was no media inquiries, and if there were, he would work with investigator Frank Camp, who was serving as a public information officer for the department, to do so.
Okay. We've been going about an hour and 20 minutes. Chief Singletary, I'm happy to continue on. Are you good, or do you want to take a few moments?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Catherine, can you put Exhibit 50 up on the screen? And I'd like you to take us to paragraph 14. Okay. I want to focus your attention, Chief Singletary, on the last sentence of paragraph 14, where on your notice of claim, where you say there was further conversation, and I answered the few questions the mayor asked, who concluded this conversation, asking to keep me in the loop by saying, "Okay, keep me in the loop, Chief." Do you see that?
Yes.
First of all, what do you recall about the further conversation?
It was relative to, you know, the ongoing investigations that we had ordered, or the investigations that we had initiated with regard to Mr. Prude, which was the internal investigation, the criminal review, as well as the circumstances surrounding, you know, Mr. Prude's encounter with Rochester Police.
Did you discuss with her in this conversation anything about whether the officers who were involved would be taken out of public-facing duties during the course of an investigation?
During the initial phone calls?
Yes.
No, we did not.
Okay. Am I correct that you made a decision at some point in time not to take the officers off of public-facing duties during the period of a criminal review and a potential internal review?
That is correct. The command staff and I had several conversations about this. We went back and forth, and I made the decision to not take them off of administrative duty. At that particular point in time, based on the preliminary review, I didn't find anything that warranted such.
Okay. When do you think, Chief, you made that decision?
We had discussions about it that day on March 23rd, and we also had discussions about it March 30th, when Mr. Prude passed away. I'm sorry, it would have been the 31st, because the next day.
Okay. And among your command staff, was there anyone who took the view that one or more of the three officers who had had hands-on with Mr. Prude should be put on administrative duty and taken off the street?
No.
So your testimony is that the uniform or unanimous position of your command staff was to permit these officers to continue to work on the street.
Correct. After a preliminary review of the incident, watched the body-worn camera video, there was nothing that I found at that particular point in time to take them off the street.
At any point up to, and this is a very long period of time, so I understand if it may take you a minute to think about this, but at any point up to August 4th of 2020, did you have a conversation with the mayor where it was discussed that the officers involved in this incident would remain doing public-facing police work and would not be placed on administrative duty?
Yes.
When was that?
That was September 2nd. We were in the mayor's conference room. It was myself, communications director Roy, the deputy mayor James Smith, and corporation counsel Tim Prude.
Okay, we'll come to that. And other than what you've already testified to, can you tell us of what you recall about other questions the mayor asked during this initial call? That is to say, during the second call on March 23rd.
Yeah, we talked about how he was from Chicago. The mayor asked, what Mr. Prude's actions were, the officer's actions were. She asked some clarifying questions with respect to, like I said, the vomiting. We talked about the officers not using any punches, kicks. I made reference to the Pate case. I said it wasn't like that. The officers stabilized him. We talked about the spit sock. And I talked about the internal investigations that I had ordered. And I made reference to the documents, like I said, again, in my notice of claim.
Okay. Catherine, can you pull up Exhibit 8 for us? Okay. First page. We're marking, Chief, as Exhibit 8, a document bearing the Bates number Singletary 72 and 73. And I'm focusing really on the second email, which is from Lieutenant Sweatman to you on the 23rd at 4:05. Just a couple clarifying questions. Where it says, Chief, please see the attached IDC and JOB card along with other reports that you received earlier today if you need to reference them for anything. Do you see that?
Yes.
What are IDC and JOBs?
The IDC would have been the interdepartmental correspondence that we reviewed earlier, and Lieutenant Sweatman, which would have been the preliminary review, the review that's done within 48 hours. That's the report that I talked about that's not in its finality. It's just a preliminary review, giving me information based on the body-worn camera video or any other video that they may come into encounter with. It could be video from a private residence. It could be video from a commercial establishment, and any reports relating to the incident.
Okay. And the JOB card, what is that?
The job card, it's a electronic printout of the job card or the actual job that the officers respond to. So it has the address of the incident location. It has the officers that responded.
I'm sorry. It has the what of the, say again, what's the first thing it has?
It has the incident location, which would have been Jefferson Avenue. It has the officers who are on the job card and any other additional responses that 911 dispatcher may have put on the what we call a job card. So it's actually basically a printout of the transactions that occurred that evening or that morning.
We call it a radio run in New York City, but I understand. So the lieutenant says, please advise if you want if you want this to be an internal at this time, or if we're waiting for an update on his status. What did you understand Lieutenant Sweatman to be asking you there?
Whether this is going to be a full-blown investigation at this particular point in time, or was it going to be a preliminary review? There are times where there is a preliminary review conducted and the officers do not find anything wrong. I'm sorry, the sergeants in professional standards sections who are doing the review do not find anything wrong in the conduct of the officers, any violations, policies, or procedures. This case, the prognosis of Mr. Prude was not good, so we wanted to take this serious from the start. So that is why I ordered the internal investigation as well as the criminal review immediately, as we knew that the prognosis was not good, and also as we knew that Mr. Prude had went unconscious at some point due to the officers' involvement with him.
We'll come to some other exhibits later in the day, but it was my understanding from the documents, and you'll tell me if this is wrong, that the internal review by the PSS was put on hold until the criminal review was complete. Is that correct?
So actually, my deputy chief, Mark Simmons, used to get on me all the time about saying this. Both investigations had commenced simultaneously. I used to say that the internal review was not going to commence until after the criminal review was done. And the reason that is, so we have the internal review, and we have the criminal, we have the internal investigation, we have the criminal review. The internal investigation had commenced at the same time that day, March 23rd, up until the point where we interview the officers. The criminal investigation takes precedent over the internal investigation because of garrity, which means that officers, as you know, which means that officers can be compelled to testify in the professional standards section, which is the internal review. So that's why we don't interview the officers prior to the criminal investigation being complete, because there could be things that are said under compulsion that could interfere with the criminal investigation should criminal charges be brought upon the officer. Case in point, if an officer says something in the internal investigation that is compelled, because they're compelled because if they don't cooperate, I can fire them. Mm-hmm. If the criminal investigation is complete, then the internal would commence with regard to the officers being interviewed. So both investigations were done simultaneously, ordered simultaneously, up until the point where the officers were going to be interviewed.
Understood. Okay, so just so I get it straight in my head, when the internal investigation and the criminal go forward at the same time, the only thing that is held back on the internal PSS investigation is the interview of officers. But if there are other things that need to be done, they are done. Is that fair?
Correct. Gathering paperwork, talking to other individuals involved in the incident. And it's my understanding in this incident, in the internal investigation, that the officers were going to be interviewed, in the criminal, that the officers were going to be interviewed sometime in April. But mid-April, the Attorney General's office had took over the investigation from the Morrow County District Attorney's office.
Understood. Catherine, can you take us to Exhibit 9, please? And this is a one-page document bearing the Bates number Singletary 79. Chief Singletary, this is a text message that was produced, I believe, by your counsel. Between you, Deputy Chief Morbido, and Commander Rivera. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And in this text message, this is the 24th of March. You say, any updated status on our patient from Jefferson Avenue? That's a reference to Mr. Prude, right?
That is correct. I wanted to find out what his status was.
And why were you asking that question?
Just to ask the Deputy Chief if Mr. Prude was still alive, as we knew his prognosis was not good.
It was
And,
just a status check for myself.
okay. And that's because it was a very important matter to you, right?
A very important matter.
Yeah. And Deputy Chief Morbido responds, no change. Is that right?
That is correct.
I guess Deputy Chief Murrah is on this chain as well.
Exactly. He was responsible for, he was primarily responsible for the media as well. So I wanted to make sure that he was in the loop.
Okay. You could take that down, Catherine. Chief, I'm going to ask you, and this will happen throughout the day, some questions from Exhibit 1, just so the committee knows and the public knows. This is a compendium of text messages from the chief's cell phone. I am not going to screen share these portions because there's a lot of private information of people's phone numbers and such. But I am going to be quoting from it from time to time, and I'll ask, Chief, that you follow along on your hard copy. Is that okay?
Yes.
So I'm looking at, so we've marked as Exhibit 1 a compendium of text messages that runs in the Bates range, Singletary 1 through Singletary 62, and then we have some additional text messages, Singletary 277 through 282. That's just for the record. I'm going to focus your attention for the moment, Chief, on a text message that appears on Singletary 3. It's text message number 5 at the top of the page. Do you see that?
Yes.
And this is a text message from you to Lieutenant Sweatman on March 23rd at 5 p.m. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And just to be clear for the record, that the text actually says 9 p.m., but your counsel has informed me that that's the UTC time and we're going on Eastern Standard, so we subtract 4 hours, right?
That is correct.
Okay. And you texted to Lieutenant Sweatman, quote, point of clarification, parentheses, as we talked about so much today, end parentheses, spoke with the DCA. During the internal, we would interview AMR. We wouldn't interview the brother of the patient, as he is high on PCP. Hope that makes sense. Sorry for the confusion earlier. For the criminal, we are not interviewing the AMR folks. Do you see that?
I do.
What were you communicating to Lieutenant Sweatman in that text message?
So these were conversations that we were having earlier on that day. As, like I said, the investigation was hours old. The incident was hours old. And these investigations are fluid. So we were talking about the process for the investigations and the route that they were going to take. You know, ultimately, we did wind up interviewing AMR for the criminal review. So these were just conversations that myself and the DCA, which is Deputy Chief of Administration Mark Simmons, at the time were having with respect to figuring out how the investigations were going to go.
Why would you direct Lieutenant Sweatman not to interview the ambulance personnel and not to have the Major Crimes Unit doing the criminal investigation interview the ambulance personnel?
Again, these investigations are fluid, so it was early on in the process. The internal investigation is primarily to see if there's any violations of policy and procedure. If there came a point in time where they did need to interview AMR, that certainly could be done so. But I think this was a question that had came up that day, early on in the day, and we had talked about it, and then obviously clarified later on what we meant.
But just to be clear, as of the point that you sent this message at 5 o'clock on the 23rd, you had determined that the Major Crimes Unit doing the criminal investigation of your officers should not interview the ambulance personnel. Is that fair?
That is correct.
Right. And what was the basis for your decision to direct that the MCU not interview the ambulance personnel?
Again, I think it was more so based on the internal review focusing on policy and procedure. for the internal aspects of it. But again, we did ultimately wound up interviewing the AMR folks. So there was a myriad of conversations that were had that day. As you can tell, because we talked about so much. I can't recall specifically why, but during the internal investigation, we focused on policy and procedure, conduct of the officers.
Let's go to same exhibit, Singletary 4, and I'm focusing on the text number 8. This is a text message from you to Deputy Chief Morabito on the 26th of March, in which you say, "No change in our Jefferson Avenue dude, ? Do you see that?
Yes.
That's you asking Chief Morabito what the status was of Mr. Prude medically. Is that fair?
Correct. Throughout that week, I was continuously asking what was the status of Mr. Prude.
And the response that you got at that point, do you recall it?
I believe it was no change.
Okay. By the way, when you make a decision, as you did here, not to take officers off the street during the pendency of a criminal investigation, is that decision documented anywhere?
No.
Okay, so you don't write a memo or have someone write a memo that here's my thinking on the reasoning for not taking somebody off the street in this kind of situation?
No.
Okay. And that's a decision that rests entirely with you, within your power as chief, right?
That is correct. We looked at the collective bargaining agreement with the locals club, and part of that, making that decision was to place an officer on administrative assignment. There had to be belief or something present that the officer had committed a criminal act. And at that particular point in time, by watching the video, very preliminary, as investigations had not completed, that decision was made to not place the officers on administrative assignment or suspended.
So your understanding of the collective bargaining agreement is that in order for you to exercise your discretion to take a cop off the street, you would have to conclude that he had engaged in criminal conduct?
Well, that's just not the sole factor. There was other factors that went into play, watching the video as well as, the conduct of the officers at the scene. Yes.
Okay. Well, I want to come back to those other factors for a second, but just so I'm clear, what you're telling me now is that one of the reasons that you decided not to take these officers off the street was that the collective bargaining agreement prohibits you from doing so unless you conclude that they have engaged in criminal conduct.
Correct. That was our interpretation of it at the time. Again, during this incident, Mr. Prude early on was still alive. And at the time that we watched the body-worn camera video, we did not find anything at that particular point in time that would warrant such.
And after he died, you didn't change your view and take the officers off the street at that point, right?
Correct.
And it was the same analysis at that point, or did you even do an analysis at that point as to whether to take them off?
Yep. As I testified earlier, we had a discussion the day after that he passed away on the 31st. We did have that discussion.
Okay. And tell me about that discussion. First, the we is you and your command staff, is that right?
Correct.
Was that something you discussed with the mayor?
No.
Okay. And what was the position of the members of your command staff after Mr. Prude died about whether these 3 officers or any one of them should be taken away from public-facing duties?
Their stance has still stayed the same, that we didn't find anything that was outwardly egregious within the video that the officers had conducted. There was no strikes or punches or anything excessive at that particular point in time of the preliminary review. And as I said, the investigations have been ordered, and to my understanding, to this day, the investigations are not complete.
And did you also at that point determine that you were prohibited from taking these officers or any one of them off of public-facing duty by the collective bargaining agreement as you interpreted it?
Yes, we did talk about that, yes.
Is there a particular provision or article of the CBA that you think limits your discretion in that way?
We did talk about, I don't recall the exact article, but I know what it is in the collective bargaining agreement. It talks about administrative duty.
Okay. Catherine, can you take us to Exhibit 10, please? So we're marking as Exhibit 10, one-page document. Yeah, thank you. Singletary 80. Chief, this is a text message from Chief Morabito to you on March 30th at 11:37 p.m., where he informs you that Mr. Prude has just passed away. Is that right?
That is correct.
And he asks whether there's anything that he and the team need to do that night, and you say, we'll deal with this tomorrow, right?
As stated, I don't believe we need to do anything tonight. I think we've done all that we can do up to this point prior to him being pronounced. We can reassess in the morning. I'll let Sandra know. Sandra, being the Monroe County District Attorney, know in the morning as she wanted to be in the loop, and I'll let the mayor know the update in the morning.
I'm reminded, you did mention that you had had a conversation with the district attorney, the Monroe County DA, Ms. Dorley. The first time you spoke to her, when was that?
I sent her a text message on the evening of the 23rd, whatever, around 3, 4 o'clock. I think the text messages are one of our exhibits. I spoke to her.
And yeah, when did you have a conversation with her?
I had a conversation with her the following day, which had been the 24th.
And tell us about that conversation. What was that about?
I pretty much explained to her the incident that occurred with Mr. Prude on the morning of the 23rd. I went through the details of such. I had ordered an internal and a criminal investigation, and I told her that I wanted her office to be involved in this.
What did she have to say?
She said, absolutely.
Okay. Did District Attorney Dorley make any mention at that point of the fact that the Attorney General's office may have jurisdiction on this matter?
Her and I did briefly discuss that. One, Mr. Prude had not passed away when I talked to her on the 24th. So we did have conversations about that as to whether they were going to take it or not. But at that particular point in time, it was going to be handled by her office.
Was it your understanding, Chief, that the Attorney General's authority would not sort of kick in, that they would not be taking over an investigation unless the person passed away?
That is my understanding.
When you learned that Mr. Prude had passed away from Chief Morabito, did it strike you that now that this issue had reached a level where it was something that should be reported publicly, that there should be a public notification of what had occurred?
It did not.
Why not?
It didn't strike me. When you say strike me, I mean, we always took this incident serious. There just wasn't any conversation that the mayor or I had with regard to releasing this publicly. We just never had the conversation.
Fair enough. I'm really asking about your internal reflections, knowing that this was a major issue in your department. You were keeping careful track of this gentleman's progress or lack of progress medically. You were having conversations, important conversations with your command staff about whether to pull these cops off the street or not. You personally watched the body-worn camera video of the mental health arrest. And all of these things are going on, and I'm just asking whether you, in your own mind, that it ever occurred to you when he died that this is something the public should know.
It never occurred to me.
You can take this down, Catherine. Thank you. Chief Singletary, I want to direct your attention back to Exhibit 1. This is the one that we are not screen sharing, and specifically Singletary 6 on the Bates range and message 19. This is a text message from you to Mayor Warren, correct?
Text message number 6.
I'm sorry, page 6, Singletary 6 is the Bates number, the number that's stamped at the bottom, and it's text number 19 if you look at the side column.
Yes, from me to Mayor Warren.
Okay. And this is a text message that you sent to her on the morning of the 31st of March at 7:28 a.m. Is that correct?
7:28?
Yes.
It's been 8:28 p.m. minus 4 hours.
Oh, my math is terrible. Okay, 8:28. Is this the first time you communicated to the mayor that Mr. Prude had died?
Correct. It says, "Morning, Mayor. The individual I gave you a briefing about last night." I'm sorry. Let me start over. "Morning, Mayor. The individual I gave you a briefing about last Monday, in parentheses, gentleman likely high on PCP from Chicago. Doctors pronounced him last night. The cause of death will be determined by the ME's office at some point."
So I want to ask a couple questions about this. First of all, when you refer to the ME's office, that's the medical examiner, right?
That is correct.
What brought you to the conclusion that the medical examiner would be involved in this matter?
To determine the cause of death.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
To determine the cause of death.
Okay. And you knew at this point that this was an issue that was going to be looked at by the medical examiner's office because this was not a natural death. Is that fair?
That is correct.
Okay. And did you consider it to be significant that the medical examiner's office was going to look at this matter?
Well, the medical examiners looks at deaths that are unattended or that we don't know the true cause of such. And this incident had special circumstances given the fact that police officers were involved in this incident. That's why we took it very serious. That's why I notified the mayor about such.
And you would agree that telling the mayor that the medical examiner's office was going to look at this was a way for you to communicate that this was an important and serious matter from your perspective?
That is correct. The medical examiner's office taking a look at this certainly would have determined the cause of death. At that particular point in time, we didn't know what the cause of death was that morning. And knowing that the police officers were involved in this incident, that was a special circumstances as to why I even alerted the mayor in the initial. Unfortunately, you know, there are overdoses that occur within the city of Rochester, drug overdoses. This one was never described by me, nor is it written anywhere in a report that I can find. It certainly has been attested to me that I described it as a drug overdose, but never did I ever state that this was a drug overdose. The reason for me notifying the mayor was because that police officers were involved in this incident, and there are police officers that respond to overdoses in the city of Rochester that occur, that are fatal, that I do not notify the mayor about. This one I did notify the mayor about because police officers have physical contact with Mr. Prude.
Understood. In other cases where there are overdoses and people die, those cases are subject to review by the medical examiner, right?
That is correct.
One of the ways that you strike that, in this text message, you're describing the Prude matter by saying it's the gentleman likely high on PCP, right? So that's a reference to his having, from your perspective or belief, having used PCP prior to his death.
That is correct, based on the reports, based on the information that was received from family as well.
Okay. But I guess what I'm saying is that the reference to the fact that he took PCP was kind of a shorthand that you used to describe this person?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Kelly, at a convenient point, I will need a break soon.
Okay. This may be it. Let me just see here.
Okay.
I think we should probably stop here because I'm going to go into another area, and I'd prefer. Is that okay, Councilmember Patterson and Councilmember Evans, if we take 10 minutes or so?
I concur with a 10-minute break. Councilmember Evans, do you concur?
I concur, Councilmember.
All
All right, so it is, we're just going to say it's 11:30 now. Let's be back by 11:40.
Thank you.
Thank you.